Tuesday afternoon edition of the Fenway Rundown podcast. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam here. I started, I think, both episodes last week by noting that there wasn't a ton to talk about, yet we still got more than 30 minutes out of them. So we're going to try to do the same today. Your Boston Red Sox folks at home have not done much in the way of transactions since Christmas still. Blake Sable is the only addition they've made. The roster is the way it's been now for really close to 6 weeks. But we will soldier on. We will keep recording the podcast. We got to hear from Sam Kennedy yesterday, and we will start there. Sean, the first day of spring training, the first media availability with Craig Breslow and Alex Cora is 1 week from today. As we said on the pod last week, we're both flying down, as well as Chris Smith and Lauren Campbell with MassLive to cover spring training. We'll all be there for the first week. Has anything in your mind changed about this team since we last spoke? Has anything moved the needle on Alex Bregman on anything? Because with me, it has not.
No, it doesn't seem so. Sam Kennedy left the door open for additional moves before the start of the season, and my guess is that there will be some 40-man additions before March 27th. That's kind of become the industry standard now, where stuff leaks into February, if not March. How big that move is going to make, or is going to be, or plural, we have no way of knowing. I would imagine it probably involves a reliever of some sort. I do not think that Alex Bregman is going to sign with the Red Sox. I've been pretty firm on that for the last couple of weeks. They may be thinking they can outlast him and that a 4-year deal will suddenly become more palatable as we get to the end of February. Maybe that's true. I'd still be surprised. As I said, I would expect there'll be ads, but they won't be earth-shaking by any stretch of the imagination.
So we did hear from Sam Kennedy yesterday, a very, very, very small group of reporters over at Fenway talking to the team president on Truck Day. More on Truck Day in a minute. And so I wrote the story of Sam Kennedy's kind of overarching thoughts when I put up on Twitter or X the other day. If you had Sam Kennedy, what would you ask him? There was a lot of unrealistic requests, but there were some good questions, and I tried to mix those in the awkward setting that was standing outside in outside of Fenway Park right after the truck left yesterday, and tried to get a sense of where he thought they were in terms of both the offseason kind of at large, and then the pursuit of Bregman, the pursuit of bats, everything that we have been talking about. So we'll start with Bregman just because I think that quote got a lot of play for somewhat hilarious reasons, honestly. But he said, "I'm not allowed to talk about any specific free agent negotiations or anything." But given that he's unsigned, I think that speaks for itself. Now, in print, I think people took this quote both ways. Number one, he's unsigned. It speaks for itself that we've been unable to come to an agreement with him, and so therefore we're not getting him. Or is it he's unsigned? I think that speaks for itself that if a guy's available and he fits us well, he could still be in play. It's the
When you
mode.
get right down to it, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't at all.
Well,
But
whatever the interpretation may
right.
be, whether he was suggesting wink, wink, don't close the door there because no one else has signed him and we're still interested, or it could be if we really wanted him, he'd already be here. So there are two different ways of looking at it, and yet neither is terribly revelatory because he isn't here and there's no sign that he's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of assume with the Red Sox, and we'll get to this in your column from Sunday, like the recent track record, the MO is to overpromise and underdeliver. So
Yep.
therefore, him leaving the door open, like he's not going to come out and say we're done adding to the roster yesterday, no matter what. Like it's almost a pointless question you have to ask on the long list of many. I just think like I interpreted it in the moment in having the conversation, asking the question that he was leaving the door open. But your point is strong that it doesn't matter at all. I think if he wanted to sign here, it could have been done because the Red Sox could be more aggressive. We've covered this situation ad nauseum. Obviously, we've heard and the reporting is been in other places now too about the front office or the decision maker, stare down within the front office of Sam and Alex Cora wanting somebody, and Breslow in the front office maybe wanted to go with Christian Campbell. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that as offended and upset as the Red Sox were about seeing that report when it first came out, like it's true. And I think Christian Campbell, the more time that goes on, I think Christian Campbell has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a better than even chance that Christian Campbell is the opening day second baseman on this team for a number of reasons. Uh, we can ascribe some of it to their inactivity and passivity when it comes to finding other options and finding a right-handed bat, and specifically one like Bregman who could fill in at not fill in, but play second base and do so well as a former Gold Glove winner at another position. But it just seems that as each day passes, and I'm not suggesting they're going to hand Campbell the job regardless of how he looks
Mm-hmm.
over, 25 or 30 spring training games, but I think they have the confidence in him that he can handle it. I think they're further buoyed by the fact that having him on the opening day roster paves the way for an additional draft pick if he is to finish among the leaders of the Rookie of the Year balloting and or AL MVP. I know that's a stretch, but certainly he could be among the more celebrated rookies in the league, and that would give them an additional draft pick, the following summer. I think that can't be discounted, but it just seems that they're not operating with what they say they are, which is a sense of urgency.
And we'll get to that right now. There's a lot been made about the preseason proclamations or the pre-offseason proclamations for the second straight year. It was the headline and the lead note in your Sunday column. Some things I think. The Red Sox messaging has been a giant failure. You write that it's bad enough the Red Sox have put such a disappointing product on the field the last 3 years. That's poor decision making, ill-advised moves, and an unwillingness to spend. So maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise. But just as damaging has been the team's brutally poor messaging at the start of the offseason. The Red Sox trot out the team president, manager, and whoever happens to be running baseball ops and insist that their goal is to win 90-plus games, and then they behave in ways that don't match their promises. With the backdrop of that was a question I asked Kennedy yesterday, and I said, you talked about extreme urgency internally. Do you feel like you guys have acted in that way this offseason? And my read would be yes when it came to Crochet and no when it came to everything else, especially spending. His response, I do. The approach Brez took was one of extreme aggression, extreme urgency. That doesn't mean you're going to end up signing every single free agent you engage with or complete trades that you embark on. Parenthetical, it's everybody else's fault. Back to the quote. It has been great to see the aggressive approach and the sense of urgency within baseball operations to improve. Asked a question about where the payroll is right now. Everybody knows well under the CBT. Everybody knows under where they were a year ago. What they've added in terms of the Bueller money and the Sandoval money, the Crochet money, Chapman and Wilson, does not add up to what Jansen, Martin, Pivetta, O'Neill, Paxton, some of these other guys were making last year. Sam said we have the ability to add if we can match up on deals that make sense in terms of where we stand right now. I was asked a question earlier in the offseason about the ability to spend. We were engaged in the Juan Soto negotiations. It's something we have the ability to be flexible with, but it is so player and deal specific. We're trying to do what's right for the Red Sox for the short term, trying to put a team out there that's built to win in 2025, but also it makes sense for the long term. It's always a difficult line to walk, that balance. We get criticized for our messaging on that front, and we understand that. Hard to navigate short and long term. So here's where I think it really, to me, there's just a disconnect between that quote and the quotes that were such headline makers from Mike Silverman back in November. So this offseason's full throttle. Mike Silverman from the Globe, both of us know well. Guy who covered the Red Sox for years and years and years, went down to New York for the owners' meetings, get Sam Kennedy in the lobby of the owners' meetings. And this is the line Silverman has in this story after his conversation with Kennedy. If the Sox are unable to snag Soto, a sense of extreme urgency internally is driving the team to spend elsewhere on players who can yank the club out of a multi-year occupancy in the mire of mediocrity. So that is what Kennedy told him. It's very, very clear. It's not Soto or bust. It is not trade market. It's a fine other way to do this. The plan at that point was to spend. So I guess the question once again is where's the disconnect between that November 20th quote, the full throttle quote in early November of last offseason, and when it came time to cutting checks? And there's a huge disconnect in that as we sit here on February 4th.
Yeah, I do not understand Sam patting the organization on the back and celebrating how aggressive they've been. How can you look at this offseason and call it aggressive? I mean, do we now give trophies out for trying to sign free agents? You know, this is not oh, well, we gave it a good shot. People don't want to hear that, nor should they. There has to be a follow through and a success rate so that there are times when they push themselves past the comfort level, spend more than they thought they were going to, and walk away with the player. We give them high marks for the trade for Crochet. And I'm one of these people who think if you're saying, well, that doesn't count because it wasn't a free agent.
Right.
Look, the ultimate goal is to put the best team on the field. If that means you get your future number one starter by giving up 4 prospects, including 2 of your top 5, then that's fine. It isn't necessary to make every move a free agent move and a big splash signing, but you can't stop there. And I realize they added Bueller, they added Chapman, they did some other things, but they identified pitching and a right-handed bat as their most obvious need going into the offseason. And they did literally nothing to address the second part of that equation. And worse, they're patting themselves on the back for, trying real hard. People don't want to hear that, nor should they.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of doubters out there that they actually went to $700 million for Juan Soto. We've confirmed through your reporting in the immediate aftermath of that, they actually did. And we've said, you know what? They deserve in the days after on this pod and in print, we both said they deserve credit for that. It shows they made a real effort. This wasn't for show. Well, where did that money go? And also there's a world in which they could have done Soto for the money and Crochet for the prospects. Totally, totally reasonable. And that would be, totally, totally possible because you're, paying in 2 different ways. There's also, the thought that I still have that if there's a huge benefit of getting Crochet the way you do, if you go and you sign Max Fried, he takes your offer of 190, or you go all in on Corbin Burns, or you go all in on Snell as your high-priced addition, then the next move probably has to be on the trade market. You're probably unlikely to, go out and spend big because you've spent a large chunk of your money with Soto, pretty much all of it. With Fried, a huge amount of it. Same with Snell. But when your first move is a trade, that opens up the fact that, okay, this guy's only eating, as of now, we'll talk about the extension later, the 3.84 million for next year, that opens up you having the possibility to go out and add these big salaries.
Right.
So A makes a lot of sense, but the fact they never got to B doesn't. And I think that's just where we are right now.
Right. And I was never one of those people who thought, oh, they have 700 million lying around. Okay, so it's time to sign 2 350 million free agents in the absence of landing Soto. I know that that's not how it works. They were after Soto because he was a generational type player who was only 26 years old, who could really impact the roster from top to bottom. It never, to me, served as a vow or a promise that they were going to allocate that 700 million elsewhere, but they could have done something other than Bueller and Chapman, which are the only significant free agents that they signed afterward. And that didn't even get to 10% of what they were offering Soto. And the notion that, they have it, so why didn't they allocate it differently? You don't want them spending freely just because this money's burning a hole in their pocket, but somewhere there should have been a happy medium in between virtually nothing at all, which is where we are, and having to spend all of that $700 million in a different way. No one thought, or no one with any common sense should have expected that, but we sure as hell expected more than we got.
Yeah, and again, can we say this with finality with Bregman still out there? Technically, no, but I don't think either of us think it's particularly likely. Same with Alonso, same with these other guys, on the free agent market. So that's where we are as we literally pack for spring training here in the next week. Um, I just think that there is this, I don't know if it's kind of analysis paralysis type thing, if that's the phrase, but like this desire for a perfect fit when, not every guy on the free agent market is going to be absolutely perfect for you. I've never been a proponent of Arenado because of the moving parts, and neither of us thought trading Casas was very smart. Neither of us have been very high on Bregman, right, throughout the entire process because of Christian Campbell, because of his ask, because of everything. But, your point about, hey, overpay for O'Neill for the year or overpay for Teoscar and, deal with that in year 3. Like the fear of making those types of even short-term commitments to me is a little bit staggering where yes, there's imperfections with Tyler O'Neill. The strikeout rate is high. He gets hurt all the time. With Teoscar, age is going to be a factor at the end of the deal. There's other players we could look at, whatever it might be, but the idea of getting uncomfortable is something outside of Crochet we literally haven't seen this organization do in 5 years, 6.
Well, let's put it this way, as was pointed out to me by somebody yesterday. They have not signed a position player to a major league free agent deal in each of the last 3 off seasons.
Well,
How was
no,
that?
it's since Adam Duvall. He's the last one. That was
Okay,
January, so
maybe it was
two full
maybe it
years
was
ago.
multi-year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure the last multi-year one was Kike
But
or
no,
Yoshida.
no major league free agent deals to position players in the last 2.
Right. Yes,
There were
and
none last year, and there's not been one this year.
O'Neill is it was a trade last year. He was the big position player
Right.
addition, replacing Verdugo. That's a sound move again. But yes, the point stands, and that's just I think, this year the fact that the position players they've added are the 2 backup catchers and Narvaez and Sable, just another kind of like mind blowing fact as we sit here as the market continues to move. Where do you square the messaging critique you had on Friday with the latest version of it yesterday?
Well, I would continue to echo it and amplify it because Sam's stubbornness about, wow, we've been so aggressive and I'm so proud at the urgency. For what? What is the, I don't understand how you can promise that there's going to be urgency, not do anything in the free agent market, and then say, we sure were aggressive. That's a complete disconnect. It's a disconnect from reality. And it's the kind of thing where fans hear it and roll their eyes because they know it doesn't make sense, that it doesn't fit what they have seen and heard, not just the last few months, but the last couple of years. And they don't seem to understand that when they come out and make these promises in the first week of October and then fail to live up to them even a little bit, how they're portraying themselves and how the fan base has reacted to it, which is a combination of distrust and disgust. When people feel like they've been lied to, or at least misled, if we want to be polite about it. And frankly, given the lack of activity, it's hard to tell those people that they are overreacting because they were told that this was going to be different. We're back to 500. Now we've got all these prospects. Now's the time. Craig Breslow kept saying, our fans have been patient enough. Mm-hmm. Well, they've been patient all winter too, and here we are.
I think that, we harp on the John Henry not talking thing. and I think this is, an evolving take in my head about why that matters even more as we come up this week, I believe, on the 5 year anniversary. I know you wrote a column about that and we discussed it. The idea that Sam Kennedy has to answer these questions, we're not talking to the buck stops here guy, and we're not talking to the guy who makes that final call. And therefore, he is in a position. Does he handle everything perfectly? Of course not. We know that better than anybody, really, and the fans obviously do too. He's a guy who's in the middle of answering to his bosses and for them, and John Henry and Tom Werner, and trying not to throw Craig Breslow under the bus, the guy who works for him, when if you are John Henry or you are Steve Cohen, you can literally do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want, and there's no repercussions because
Yeah, you're not answering to anybody above
you're
you.
not. And so that's why these quotes are so unsatisfactory all the time. Um, I don't think Sam handles a lot of the messaging perfectly. We've seen that. I do think he's in a tough spot, as we've talked about over time. He gets paid handsomely to be in that tough spot. That's very well understood here. But when you have somebody who is not the ultimate decision maker and is not the principal owner, and look, this we can take this even farther with the theory that you had all last offseason about Tom Werner and John Henry and the disconnect there. Tom Werner can say full throttle, and he's got a huge role in the organization, bigger than Sam's, right? The chairman, but still not number one. He's still
Yep,
number two.
Not making the final call.
And so John Henry was clearly not on board with the full throttle. Was John Henry on board with the extreme urgency internally? We need him to storm the Fenway Rundown studios like he did 98.5 back in the day, which would be weird because he'd have to pick one of our residences, and that would be very strange for all of us. I just feel like when you don't have that guy, answering questions, then you're opening yourselves up for this weird messaging. If John Henry was the one delivering the message, it would probably be more consistent at least, but the refusal to do that just creates kind of a clown show.
Right. And it leaves a lot up to interpretation. It makes Sam Kennedy the fall guy and the bearer of bad news. As you said, he's not doing that for minimum wage, so there will be no fundraisers for Sam Kennedy or any pity parties or anything like that. He is the president and CEO of the club, the president and CEO of Fenway Sports Group. He can handle himself. I think part of the problem is Sam's personality, which, as we know, and as everybody who has watched him speak and interact, he is naturally a buoyant, optimistic, sunny type of person. And when you are trying to explain inactivity and passivity in combination with that personality trait, there's a disconnect there too. And fans say, why is this guy smiling? Why is this guy saying, we're going to be better and we're really excited about? That's him. That's who he is. And I understand that. But it is not meshing with what they're doing, or more to the point, what they're not doing.
Yeah, and it's always this cycle we see from fans, and I read a lot more of the Twitter responses than you do, for better or for worse, and by that I mean definitely for worse. And like we go back and forth between why aren't they answering questions? They need to be held accountable. And then when they do, why do they even open their mouths? We've heard enough, and that's just kind of that cycle that goes on and on. This has been a discussion point for really my entire time on the beat. And so for really 7, 8+ years now, as we hit this 5 year anniversary for John Henry, I wish I waited longer for this idea. It was before you were at MassLive. And I wrote the column, if John Henry were to speak, these are the questions we'd ask him. Which, hey, maybe that's your Friday notebook column idea for this week. I pulled it out in like 2021, 1 year into it, because I didn't think it would go 5 years. But there is a long list. We could do a whole pod off of that.
5 years and no end in sight.
That's right. Sean, do you care about truck day attendance at all?
Frankly, I do not, Chris. No.
Okay. Well, there you go. That settles that. I mean, it's one thing where,
although it is it's I think where you're going here is that the drop off in those sort of ceremonial things.
No, I don't care about it either, but people do.
Well, but it's reflective of the way the fan base feels about the organization. That even in a winter in which they did some good things, and we've said that, getting Crochet, getting Chapman, getting Bueller were all positive moves
I'll
that we
butt in by
endorsed.
saying still a C or C plus if it ends today.
No argument. I'm saying there is some reason to be optimistic that they'll be better than last year, even if they haven't come close to checking all the boxes they needed to. But the fact that you were there, I mean, what were there 2 dozen people hanging out for
Well, it was
this
hard
thing?
to. The context that very few people are going to care about is that they said the truck was going to leave at 1. I arrived at 12:30, and the thing had already pulled off. So it wasn't much in the way of ceremony. It was the driver was ready to go, the bags were packed, and they sent it. I think if they were expecting a few hundred people for 1 o'clock and some real ceremony, and I saw the pictures of 20 years ago, Larry Lucchino shaking hands of fans and all that stuff. That just is not the case anymore. It doesn't really register. I mean, it's cool that it did because it's a
Well,
truck
and
pulling
and
out,
it's
but
not it's not that truck day doesn't register. It's reflective of a drop off in interest and
yeah,
enthusiasm. That's, I mean, we can joke about the fact that people used to show up and make a day of going to watch a tractor trailer truck pull up Boylston Street, but it was a sign of the enthusiasm and interest and optimism that the fan base had for the coming season. It was kind of a goofy thing to say, oh, today's truck day, spring can't be far off, all of that. We can laugh about it, but it used to have people energized for the season. And now people just mock it or don't pay attention to it at all because they don't feel invested in what the team's doing.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I think you see the lack of interest reflected in the Nesson ratings and the attendance being down and opposing fans taking over and just on an anecdotal level how much you see people talking about the Red Sox compared to the other teams in town on a daily, weekly basis. You've been obviously, I'll point this out all day long, around a lot longer, both on the beat and on Earth. So you have, the experience of being able to tell those anecdotes of the interest level. But I mean, I can't speak to what Truck Day was like in 2003, really, but there's no way it was as limited in terms of attendance and appeal yesterday. I just don't have it on the top of the list compared to some of those other things. I don't
Yeah,
think you do
I
either.
mean, ultimately, I'm not sure how big a barometer is, but taken individually, it's one more thing that people have stopped caring about because they don't care about the team as much as they did 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and it was, interesting because it's always a window into Sam Kennedy being available. We'll have plenty more of those next week as spring training begins in earnest in Fort Myers, Florida. We'll have one more pod to wrap up the offseason, lowercase o on that, because we know the moves keep rolling along. And then again, the schedule events next week, Tuesday. Alex Cora, excuse me, and Craig Breslow will talk for the first time. Wednesday, the clubhouse opens up. It'll be sunny at least, right? So that's good.
Warmer, anyway. Yes.
Okay, good.